It was 2005, and as I got home from work, I leant against the front door as it closed behind me and looked at my flat. It was empty, it was dark, and it was unwelcoming, and I had a sudden feeling of just utter sadness. I'd spent all day in the office on my own. I worked for a small boutique agency where we relied on freelancers, and there were days where I was in the office on my own as the only full-time employee. And when I wasn't in the office on my own and my boss was there, I thought that she was going through the menopause, and so actually a working day even with people in the office could be quite difficult. And yet I was staying. It took 3 more years to pluck up the courage to say, okay, I need change. I can't work here anymore. And in fact, that was partly motivated by a friend of mine coming to work at the company and saying, what on earth are you doing here? This is a really unhappy, unhealthy environment. But I'd been there from graduating from university, and I didn't know how to feel about leaving. There was too much vulnerability, too much of the unknown, too much change. So I stuck out something I was really unhappy doing for the sake of not changing. Why is that? Welcome to the Odd Ones Out podcast. If you ever feel like you're on the outside looking in, you are not alone. Let's challenge our limiting beliefs and embrace who we truly are. Hello, you joined us. Thank you so much. I'm Beck.
I'm Maz.
And this is an episode all about vulnerability and change. Perfect timing, because do you know what? This is probably the 6th start to this episode.
Yeah.
And each time I start saying something, I get a ridiculous crash of confidence. And I'm starting to waffle or just... In fact, one of them, Maz said I was completely fine, but I stopped the recording anyway because I'm really rock bottom on confidence at the moment. I have... Yeah. So, is it hormones? Is it just because there's change happening? I don't know. Listen to other episodes if you haven't already. How very dare you listen to this one and not past ones. But I'm here and we'll go for it.
Yeah.
Because I, as the story said, sometimes struggle with change. And actually, I do find change difficult. Lots of different types of change difficult. Some it's quite straightforward because you know exactly what's going to happen, or there's an encouragement from someone who's already done that thing, and so actually the recommendation helps you to change from one thing to another. But generally, change triggers vulnerability in me, and I'm not good at feeling vulnerable. I've never embraced it. I've never really worked through how to just sit with it. And so if something's there that's going to trigger vulnerability, I'm like, no.
Well, I think whenever we've talked about it, and I tend to be, I've had to in the past embrace vulnerability because I've had a lot of it. I think we spoke even the other day a little bit about this, where I was saying that in a way, what has kept you being a really functional, successful adult is the fact that you're able to put a bit of a veneer on things and a bit of a front, and you're able to cope. Really, I mean, most people would have no clue that you lack confidence from time to time.
I can cope on I can focus on the short term.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's what's expected of me for the next hour or 2 hours, that's fine. I'll do it.
But you have the tool. You have the appearance of somebody who's very together and with it and comfortable. And I think in some ways, but in some ways that's kind of got you where you are now. But in other ways, obviously, it means that the you don't want to rock the boat.
I've got away with it.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't give you kind of pause to think about what's going on underneath. For me, I completely lack that toolkit. You know, I have been through the similar experiences, but basically ended up with a similar lack of confidence and fairly sort of low self-esteem and whatnot. But I never had that front. I couldn't just barge my way through things and just fake being an extrovert or whatever it might be. I just didn't have that in my arsenal. So I think I had to think about being vulnerable because I was just vulnerable all the time. I couldn't pretend. I'm crap at pretending, you know.
God,
it just
feels
is what
awful.
It is.
Just even thinking about being vulnerable all the time, it's like, no thanks, you poor thing.
But again, I mean, it's made parts of my life bloody hard. But at the same time, I've had to self-examine and look at myself in more depth.
And you're far more centered in your core than I am.
But I think I've had to be.
Yeah.
So it's horses for courses. But yeah, I mean, I know that without going into too much detail, it's been a really difficult week for you, and it's brought up a lot of vulnerability. And I think you're trying, which is really commendable, you're trying really hard to focus on how you feel, because that's the thing that...
Yeah, I normally try and ignore it and just focus on my to-do list. It's just the easiest way to get through it.
Because it's to you and to a lot of people, I think, it doesn't serve any obvious function. You know, if you focus on your feelings, aren't they just getting in the way of your to-do list? Or So I think it has been a big change for you just the last week, focusing more on how you feel and trying to sit with it, I guess.
But this is the problem. So if I'm a functioning adult and I like that, I have that resilience, I'm able to achieve, I can do my tick box and say, yes, this, and this is done today. That's all great because I value that. I always have done. And, you know, whether it comes from childhood and having that be validated, I don't know. But that's how I feel I've done a good job at the end of the day or week or month. Sitting with vulnerability for this last week and just trying to say, okay, if this is how I'm feeling, I'm going to try and just let it be, has given me a crash of confidence, hence the having to start the podcast 6 times. And we do these episodes, we just talk. These aren't, as you can probably tell, they're not heavily edited. We're not like that. We haven't got the time for that, and we actually prefer just having a conversation with each other. But it's starting 6 times it's not really the kind of thing that we need to do normally. But there is a voice in my head saying, why on earth am I really embracing my vulnerability if, short term, fair enough, it's actually giving me this kind of a crash of confidence? I can't even start an episode of a podcast without questioning myself and thinking to myself, oh God, that was really bad. Oh, you're just not good at this. And oh, no one's going to want to listen to this. Yeah, just all of the things that could come are currently in my head.
Yeah. Well, I think that's completely down to what your expectations are in life. You know, you might be a person, if you were the kind of person who had that, let's say that sort of superficial confidence or that kind of manufactured confidence, and that got you through life and you were successful and you did well at your chosen career, you had your kind of set of friends, whatever it might be. For some people that might be fine. And you would know, I think most people know whether that's sufficient for them, whether they're happy with that and that's okay. Then maybe you don't need to delve any deeper. But I think you, along with I think many other people, me included, you kind of have a sense that day-to-day functionality isn't really enough if it's not coupled with something a bit more, I don't know, something to balance it out anyway. Because you're, for example, a very sensitive, very emotional person, but your day-to-day life doesn't necessarily reflect that.
No.
And I think you've realised for a while that you need a little bit of that at least. But in order to get to that and to access it, you kind of need to look into what your underlying feelings are. And obviously that's going to make you feel vulnerable in the short term.
Yeah, I suppose it's those foundation blocks, isn't it? Because if I'm on that whole analogy of being a wobbly foundation block, then even if I've built up this resilience and built up this life where I'm able to achieve or have these tick boxes or to the outside world look capable, confident, whatever, actually I can't be really focusing on my core or reaching my full potential because all of those building blocks to get me to that point and that point in the first place or at the end point, whatever, aren't strong enough, and they're not really me because I'm not really thinking how do I feel on a proper basis.
And the trouble is when you build your confidence, because I'd say that in some ways you still remain a confident person, but if you build that confidence on being good at your job or achieving something, then I guess it's all about ascertaining whether that's enough for you. Is it enough to maintain this illusion of confidence, and is appearing confident for other people more important than having genuine deep-rooted self-confidence.
And I think that's the thing. I mean, this last week that Maz is referring to, I work for myself, and work as being incredibly quiet. And when it's quiet, and when I'm having to go on the hustle to kind of bring more work in and do marketing or new business, there's a vulnerability there anyway. Like, oh my goodness, are people going to like me enough to kind of buy my services, if you like? But also, my self-worth is wrapped up in my job. It's wrapped up in feedback from people that like working with me. It's wrapped up in being able to say, this is my financial contribution to the household. So if things are quiet, I'm not getting that recognition or that feeling of achievement or just satisfaction even. And therefore, my self-worth takes a plummet.
Yeah.
And so my vulnerability at the moment is really quite strong. And so, yeah, we've talked quite a bit about me trying to just own it so that when things pick up, I will actually be in a stronger place and be thinking and feeling more as myself and get them even more out of life, because I'm taking this as an opportunity than if I didn't do it. But it doesn't feel like an opportunity. When I'm right in the middle, I really don't like it at all.
But you've spent, I mean, again, I think this is really quite a common thing, but you've spent all of your life assuming that vulnerability and even to some extent having those feelings front and center is a weakness, is a bad thing. It gets in the way. Now, I know you know, logically, objectively that isn't the case, but I guess when you're in the middle of something and when things feel stressful, it must seem that way.
It does. And it taps in, my whole thing, my root conviction is not feeling good enough. So if I'm not ticking those boxes alongside the things where I value my self-worth, then guess what? I go straight back to, well, there's absolutely nothing there to prove that I'm worth anything, so I'm not good enough, and then hence the vulnerability.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the kind of the root conviction again, the not being good enough. All it takes for someone like you, who's a high achiever, who wants to build their, or has chosen to build their self-esteem on that, is a dip in money or in business, and you plummet.
Yeah.
Rather than being able to say, okay, it's a blow. It's difficult. There's a lot of stress, but my self-worth and my self-esteem is built on more than that.
Yeah,
and that's the difficulty. You're entirely reliant on external circumstances, where ideally that confidence, that self-confidence, is something you take with you into various situations in life rather than it being dependent on other things.
But I think that's exactly why, going back to the story I told at the beginning, why that change was so difficult. Because I think even back then, I had low self-worth. I wasn't good enough. I'd left university and walked straight into this job.
Yeah.
And therefore the job gave me something I was good at, gave me something I could feel, I knew my mum was proud of me being in this job. I was doing some great, interesting, exciting things because it was PR in the late 90s when there was loads of money going around and loads of great, exciting experiences that I was having. I was able to say, right, great, this is who I am, here I am. And so the change from something I felt very comfortable within, no matter how unhappy I was too great. And I wonder if maybe that's in general, change in a professional capacity would be, it was hard for me starting to work for myself. That was a huge crash of confidence, going from, being deputy managing director of an agency down to working for myself. And it was it took a long time to start feeling okay about it. It took me probably nearly a year of doing it to start thinking, okay, I feel secure. But that vulnerability was tough. So I wonder if anyone, that concept of change, and even if change is supposedly for the better, if it taps into a vulnerability and the vulnerability is linked to a negative root conviction, it's kind of like game over.
Well, yeah, and I suppose you can't really have change or be part of change without feeling some vulnerability, but it's really how you own that process and what you do with it, because being vulnerable, feeling vulnerable, it sounds negative. It sounds like a bad thing, but it doesn't have to be. I think you need to be a little bit vulnerable in order to have access to opportunities in life, to take a different path if you want to. You kind of need to tap into that a little bit. And if you've never had to do that, you say that you went straight from university, and obviously, as you've alluded to before, childhood was up and down. you go straight from university into a job where you're probably feeling a bit of that artificial confidence because you're kind of being validated a bit.
Yeah.
You never really had a chance to stop and work out what you were about.
No,
you just went from one thing to another. And I think so many people are like that. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people might get to our age and have that midlife crisis, because they've probably just gone from one thing to another, and they've never really stopped and worked out, okay, how much of me is there?
Yeah.
You know, how much is really out there in the world, and how much is dormant, and is that detrimental? You know, am I dealing with life in a two-dimensional way when I could bring more of myself to the table and feel better about things?
I do think you're right. It's not. I suppose it's not necessarily a midlife crisis thing. It's also, as in, it's around this time of life, mid to late 30s onwards, where we have probably accumulated the things that we've been working hard to get to. So in our early 20s, we might be setting ourselves a path. We would like X, Y, Z in life. And if we're fortunate, we may just now, mid-30s onwards, I mean, obviously I'm mid-40s, but I'm putting myself in there, to have got what we've been working towards. And then you look back and you go, actually, is this enough? Is is this really, really what I want at this point, now that I've evolved as a person? But I wonder if it is what's your self-worth wrapped into. My self-worth is wrapped into my professional life. Someone else's self-worth might be wrapped into having a relationship, whatever type of relationship that might be, child, partner, whatever. If one's self-worth is wrapped into something that's a tangible thing that's outside of oneself, then yes, change from that thing must elicit a sense of vulnerability. But the point is that you're making is that even if that's there, the vulnerability doesn't have to be negative. It could be a chance to grow and a chance, and why are you vulnerable in the first place? Maybe it's a cause for really evaluating. Why does it make you feel vulnerable? Is it evaluating whether that self-worth based on that, whether the thing that your self-worth is based on is actually the right thing and good enough?
Yeah, and it obviously it depends completely on what we're talking about. I mean, there'll be some things, some changes in circumstance that make people feel vulnerable, and it triggers something really, really awful from their past, and that's different. And you might need to deal with that differently, you know, speaking to someone about it, getting some professional help with it. But I think, as corny as it sounds, I think it does make sense to see that triggering that vulnerability as an opportunity. You don't have to see it as something you have to recoil from or push away. But that vulnerability, however uncomfortable it might make you feel, is telling you something. It's giving you an insight into what's going on underneath the stuff that we tend to ignore day to day because we're just getting on with life.
Yeah.
And when we have those chances to stop and to go, okay, I feel scared. I feel worried about this particular thing. I feel low self-esteem, whatever it might be. It gives us a chance to acknowledge that and practice self-compassion and to try and move forward from it. That there is no sense in ignoring it because it's there for a reason. You know, our mind and our bodies, they're very good at keeping us informed. It's just that we choose to ignore it a lot of the time.
That's true. But you were saying how you've lived with vulnerability for a long time and are far better, I'd say, far better placed at handling it than I am because you're used to it or you've worked out a way of managing it or whatever. But what do you do now when you're feeling vulnerable as someone who has learnt to accept it and grow from it?
It's still a work in progress because my issue is sometimes I have those feelings and that vulnerability, but what I don't do particularly well is to really identify it. You know, sometimes I will have a reaction to something and it will just feel like I'm being hit by a wall of stuff. And I'm aware of it and I know it's there, but I won't necessarily, what I won't do is to say, I think it's feeling sad. I think it's feeling, I don't know, grief over something, whatever it might be. I'm not very good at really pinning it down. I know that it's there. And so it gives me some clues to what's going on for me, but I don't. I probably don't identify it as much as I'd like to. And it feeling that vulnerability all of the time, me being at the other extreme, is probably not healthy either, because it means that I've suffered with anxiety, for example, because I tend to feel everything. I think the happy medium would be to have, as I said before, have access to those feelings and to acknowledge them and see them running through your head, but to not feel you have to do something with them. You don't have to react to them.
That's where I keep getting stuck is, I don't like how I'm feeling. I've got to change it. I don't like how I'm feeling. I need to label it. I don't acknowledge it, deal with it, move on. And I'm desperate to kind of move on. And you're like, just sit with it. Just sit with it. I think it was the same thing a couple of years ago when I was having to finally acknowledge to myself just how difficult my dad was when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And sitting with that feeling and basically just immersing myself in how I felt as a kid, but feeling it as an adult, because I think obviously the kid's always inside you, was really hard. But if I hadn't gone through that, thank you for your support and encouragement, by the way. If I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be feeling now that more of a, that's what it was. It would still be driving a lot of my behaviours. So I recognise the need to just sit with that vulnerability because I've gone through something similar and come out the other side and gone, actually, it's kind of like letting a fire burn out.
Yeah.
You have the vulnerability. There comes a point where at some point, please, this feeling of uncomfortableness is going to go, and I'll be stronger for it, and I'll be able to continue building on my core to reach my full potential. But I can't if I don't embrace the vulnerability, as well as just forging ahead with the things that I think matter on a tick box level.
Well, and if you think about it, your mind is perfectly capable of filtering and dealing with thoughts and feelings 24/7. I mean, it does that. Automatic pilot, it's all running in the background. It's just that if there are feelings and vulnerabilities that we actively block or try and distort or change their course or whatever, we're not trusting our minds to do the job for us. I think a lot of the time where I've had success with combating anxiety anyway is to acknowledge that I feel worried about something or I feel that fear, to sit with it, which, I mean, I know sometimes is a bit of a difficult concept to grasp anyway, and I've struggled with that a bit. How long do you do it for?
Well,
when do you know when it's finished? And all that sort of stuff. But I think if you allow it to just remain there in your mind and just trust that your system, if you like, is going to know what to do with it and how to process it, if you leave it for long enough, it will gradually, that potency of emotion is gradually going to recede and things will settle down. It's just that we do a good job as people who might struggle from time to time. We do a good job of interfering with it and thinking we know better. We somehow can affect it and mold it and change it, when actually most of the time we can't. It's too abstract a thing.
That's a really good point. And in fact, we were saying this episode is about vulnerability and welcoming change. Now, I'm postulating that the difficulty I have with change is because I don't like the feeling of vulnerability. And so unless I know exactly what the outcome is going to be of that change, I'm quite reluctant to having it, because that whole cliche of the grass is always greener doesn't necessarily apply for me, because whilst it is, and I can look at the things that are going on that I don't have in my life or whatever, actually, if one was to say to me, but to do that, you'd need to make these changes, I'd probably say, no, I'm fine. I'm fine where I am on my little plot of green grass, this side of the fence. Thanks very much. Because I can laugh it away even and say it's less effort. I'm too lazy. I just want to stay where I am. But actually, it's more because I don't want the unknown. I don't want that feeling of, well, it's not a guarantee. So therefore, I'll just stick with what I know, because I've also learnt the habits or the things to do to deal with why anytime this particular place might be difficult or challenging. I already know how to handle that, or I know what to expect. And I'd rather that than go and do something else. But that welcoming change, do you think we need change? Like just to welcome it, whatever it is, to reach our full potential?
Well, if you're not currently at your full potential, something has to change, I guess.
Good point.
Yeah. No, but I know what you mean. I think you have to have some level of comfort with change, or at least to be able to see it through. I mean, without trying to stop it from happening. If there are opportunities for things to change and you kind of know deep down that they're going to do you good and that they're going to move things in the right direction, then I think it's important and helpful to be just open to it and to accept it for what it is. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but at the same time, the more you get used to that discomfort, the more you realise it's something you can get past, and the goal is the long-term reaching your potential or feeling more you.
Because there is always a silver lining on things. And sometimes change can come not just because you've made the decision to have change as an outcome, but also because somebody else has made that decision. A boss, a partner, a family member has chosen to change something in our lives, and therefore we have to go with it. And that might be really uncomfortable, especially when it's out of our control. But we're encouraged to always see the silver lining and say, yeah, do you know what? Change is always good. And I'd hope to always be that kind of optimistic person that would always be able to find the silver lining. I don't think I'm capable of doing that right now. But I try my best. And to be fair, when I look retrospectively, whatever, at things where I have had great change, there has been a positive outcome, even if I've not recognised it at the time. So I suppose I just need to trust that a bit more.
And I think that's the key word. It's trusting. And obviously, if I don't know, to use one of your examples, if your partner breaks up with you in the immediate future, of course you're not going to feel happy about that change. It's going to be a shock. You're going to run through the whole gamut of feelings. It might take you a hell of a long time to get past it. And I don't think it's a case of just saying, oh, immediately just see the silver lining and brush it off. It's not that, but it's important to be able to move past that and to go, okay, when I feel ready to embrace this change, I can find my way out of this difficult situation and move in a different direction. It's somewhere, I want to be even more. And I'm not saying to another relationship, but just you can find a bit more of yourself. Just nudge yourself along that road to being more you and finding that potential.
But you saying all of that, and I think back to, I think the key is at that point of change, I wasn't necessarily focused on what the positive things could be because I was too quick to roll my sleeves up and deal with what was coming or try and find another way to have a tick box achievement. So, I lived with a beautiful friend for many years, and they got a relationship, and so we stopped living with each other. And I went through a period where I ended up living on my own and actually really enjoyed living on my own. But there was a period I didn't really allow myself to grieve, and I kind of needed to grieve. Yeah. I lost my job at one point. All I did was roll my sleeves up to try and get another job. Yeah. I didn't give myself a period to grieve. Yeah. We had to go through IVF. At the point where we were told it, I know I was grieving, but I didn't actually really embrace that vulnerability and really go with the grief. All I did was roll my sleeves up and say, right, well, we've got to do IVF. Well, that's it. Look, what do we do? Which clinic should we go to? How much money do we need? It was all to do. And because I didn't, so I'm just wondering while you were thinking, because I didn't take the time to actually say, how do I feel? And I'm giving examples of grief. Yeah. Because I didn't give myself the chance to focus and just feel how I should feel in that moment, I then didn't have that transition to say, okay, what's going to be good about this change? Yeah. What can I make work about this change? Rather than just, it's a change, how do I get through it?
And I think that's where, going back to something we've discussed in the past, I think that's where it's really important to be able to take stock and to work out what you really value in life. Because and again, going back, I keep saying going back to what we were saying earlier, there will be people who will prioritise having a to-do list and getting through life that way and ticking boxes, and maybe that's genuinely what they're happy with. Yeah. Maybe that is what they want, and that's cool. Maybe that's what they value and they're comfortable with it, and end of. But I think if you or anyone else were to step back and to take stock and really think about what they're putting their sort of value on, what they value. I can't talk at all today. Maybe this confidence thing is catching. I don't know. But yeah, you'd probably find that there was more there that you also value that's being sort of undernourished, and you're not nurturing. So for you, when you've been through a sort of a transition in life, you tend to, as you say, roll your sleeves up and get on with things. But if you really think about it, you probably would have benefited from that stage of grief and going through that emotion and processing it. For someone like you, though, if you value getting on with things and being functional, it's probably very easy just to go, oh, what's the point? It just seems silly.
The only reason why
stupid.
I value it is because it was the first thing that I managed to find that gave me a level of self-worth.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I sincerely value it.
No.
So I think, I think identifying what our self-worth is based on and whether we truly value that self-worth based on that thing is a good question to have. I've got it in my mind, so I don't want to forget it. Please share that point that you heard on that podcast you were listening to with the life coach, and I'm sure I can't remember his name. I'm sure you won't be able to, but that whole to do to be thing. Because actually, I really liked it. Share it if you don't mind.
No, it was just a fleeting thing I heard, and I feel bad because I can't remember the guy's name. But he was talking about the fact that people have to-do lists, and that a lot of the time, perhaps it would be beneficial to also have a to-be list alongside it, where obviously you've got the day-to-day tasks that you want to complete and the tick boxes. But to balance that out, it's also important to think about what you want to be on a given day, how you want to feel, or even sort of a week ahead, what your priorities are where that's concerned, to give it equal weight and to not just fall into the trap of thinking that life is all about achieving and getting things done. And actually those feelings, whether we like it or not, are going to surface one way or another. They can either surface as something that we're aware of and have some level of say over, or things that come up out of nowhere and cause turmoil and upset. And yeah.
I really like it. I don't know when I'm going to sit down and write a to-be list, but I really like just having that there in parallel so that it helps with the self-worth, but also it's so much more important. It's so much more weighty. I've always felt that the more tangible achievement is the weightier achievement. That whole, what's the point of feeling happier if it's not getting me somewhere? Or why should I embrace feeling a lack of confidence or feeling vulnerable if it's only just going to make the next day or two harder because my head gets more fluffy or whatever it is? But actually, when I think of it the other way around with a to-do list or a to-be list, the to-be list feels quite strong. I quite like that. We were talking about it this morning, and I just suddenly thought with what we were saying around achievements, if anyone out there is a bit like me, that maybe they'd appreciate hearing that to-do versus to-be, that's all.
Makes sense.
I don't know what else to say about this topic, actually. Is there anything else in your mind?
No, I think we've covered everything. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, especially for you while you're going through it, it must be hard to sit there and talk about this stuff. Nobody wants to feel that vulnerability because it opens something up in us. You feel exposed. You feel you don't have your normal barriers and defenses up. But I think it's always worth exploring whether you need all of those defenses and whether you can dispense with some of them. Take small risks when you feel comfortable to, in order to get closer to where you want to be.
That's nice. What he said. That's nice.
Yeah. See, I still honestly feel like I'm waffling a lot. And,
no. I don't. I'll tell you. You know what?
You would.
Yeah, I would. Thank you if you're still listening that you're still listening. And if you haven't already, and thank you so much if you haven't already and you like these episodes, please do rate us on your chosen podcast platform. It means a lot. And if you can care to put like 30 seconds into writing a few words about why you like it, even better. That would be amazing. Do check out whichever place we have finally settled on in terms of getting our act together and being, we sincerely want some level of community where if something is thrown up during the episode and you'd like to kind of put it out there for us or other listeners to respond to or chat about, let's make sure that happens, because this isn't just, we don't want to just be broadcasting.
No.
We're hoping that this is just encouraging others to kind of join us as we reach our full potential. But for now, whatever time of day it is, we hope you have an amazing rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.